Good afternoon and welcome to the launch event of Made in Slough. Made in Slough is a collection of memoirs of working in Slough in the 1960s and 1970s. My name is Michael Piercy and I have been the facilitator for the project. Normally at the start of these meetings, I have to begin by telling you where the toilets are and also where the exits are. But I think you know that, so we'll just press on. But you don't get off scot-free. There are a few short announcements. Almost 60 Slough residents contributed their recollections of working in Slough in the 60s and 70s. And we've made these memoirs into a series of podcasts available online and a 30-page booklet. Made in Slough is part of an arts initiative begun by Slough Museum and called 2020 Slough. Anna Jones, the project coordinator for the Slough Museum, will begin in a moment to explain how the name 2020 Slough came about. There are one or two things to say about recording this meeting on Zoom. First, we are recording it, as I explained before we began. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, which is fine, turn your video off. You'll still see and hear everything that we do, but you won't appear in the recording. The second point is that you may find the meeting more entertaining if you use the Speaker View button at the top right-hand corner of the screen. Select Speaker View, and this means you'll see every speaker in close-up on your screen. It won't affect what the rest of us see, but your experience could be much better. Third and most important, please stay on the mute setting. Thank you all for taking the time to attend this afternoon. We have 42 people in the meeting, and I'm very pleased with that. So let's go on with the show and begin with extracts from the first podcast. So I'll hand over now to our narrator, Jonathan Pagden.
The first rung on the ladder. Throughout the 60s and 70s, less than 10% of young people went to university. It's 40% now. It was common for young people to leave school on a Friday and start a job the following Monday. In those days, there were plenty of jobs to choose from. Our first podcast is a collection of details and memories from the atmosphere of working in Slough in the 60s and 70s. It was a different time. June Calvert summed it up when she said,
"In those days, if you wanted a pay rise, you just found another job. There were plenty of job offers in Slough. I first worked at McMichael in about 1967, but left to go to ICI in the personnel department. I didn't stay long. I went to Slough Police Station, where I worked my way up from typing cautions to summonses. We had manual typewriters. It was such a nuisance when you made a mistake, trying to scratch out the ink off the paper without going through it. Then I went back to McMichael. I was earning about £14 a week. It must have been in 1971 when I saw an advert for a bonus clerk at the council offices. The wages were £25 a week. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven when I got the job.
I worked at Tesco's and Fine Fare on the Farnham Road, and later at the Co-op in Baylis Parade as a butcher's boy. I delivered meat on a bike. Small wheel at the front, large wheel on the rear, with a wicker basket up front. That was my first company car, that bike. The Co-op used a money cable system, and it ran from the counter to the office at the rear of the shop, so no till with money in it, and customers had to wait until their change came whizzing back to them.
I started work in 1963 at the Pest Infestation Laboratory on London Road, Slough. We did research on how to prevent insects and mould attacking dried, stored food products. Very important in those days because lots of new products were being invented. Being under 18, I got a substantial 2-course lunch for, I think, 6 old pence, but the full price was only a few shillings. My wage was about £7 a week, and I got about 3 weeks holiday, plus an extra day for the Queen's birthday. That was because we were civil servants.
We used to make boats, among many other things, at Armshire Reinforced Plastics. 2 types designed by Ian Proctor, the Jiffy dinghy and the Salorsky. I've still got a photo of a Jiffy with my old workmate Marcus. At 6'8", with a big beard, he was a hard man to forget.
My first job at 15 was near Slough in the old manor house in Langley Park. It was a lovely place. Everyone was so kind. 15 was young back. They grow up so fast these days. My boss at the time gave me ice cream money when I went on holiday. He actually said, "Here's some ice cream money." Can't imagine a boss doing that these days.
I'd like to say thank you to our two readers in that section. It's Jane Heptonstall and Drew Spence. Slough Museum initiated this project, and the main supporters have been Slough Borough Council, The Curve, Arts Council England, and Resource Productions. So far in the 2020 Slough project, there have been 10 different artists doing 10 different projects. Anna Jones has been the project coordinator for Slough Museum, with the job of keeping us all in line and on schedule. Anna can't be with us this afternoon, but she has made a short video.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really sorry that I can't be live with you today. I'm actually at an event at the Curve, but I'm just delighted to be able to give you the introduction and the overview to the background of the whole project, which is 2020 Slough, or Slough 2020, whichever way that you want to say it. And it's been brilliant to have Mike Piercy involved, and all the writers and contributors and actors that have been involved in it. And I'm also really pleased that this is going out to some of the U3A group today, because they've been fantastically helpful in terms of being able to do some volunteering with me at the Slough Museum collection store. So that was a really good element to 2019 that, unfortunately, as we all know, hasn't been able to happen again. But it's brilliant that that U3A are involved in today's session as well. So just a little bit of a background to it before then Mike takes you through the work that he's been leading on. Slough Museum applied for successfully an Arts Council England grant in October 2019, and we received that funding to be able to do this project 2020 Slough. Obviously, if you cast your mind back, pre-global pandemic, we were very much looking forward to working with 20 artists, with 20 community groups, and using 20 objects from the museum's collection as inspiration. Now, as things have turned out, we've worked with a lot less in terms of community and artists and objects, unfortunately. But Mike has brilliantly persevered, and some of you along with him, and we're really, really grateful for that. So, as I say, the original intention behind the project was for artists to use collection objects as inspiration for doing co-creation of writing, of theatre, of music, of visual art, and a number of artists have still made that happen. We've worked with about 9 or 10 artists over the last year, rather than the 20 as originally planned. But they have stuck with the original intention, which was to come to the collection store. Seagrow are housing the Slough Museum collection at the moment on Plymouth Road, and the artists have come to the collection store and choose an object which was sort of something that they wanted to use in turn to inspire the community. So Mike, as you will hear or you will know, has chosen some of the radios that are part of the collection. Other artists have chosen Dia lamps, tickets from the original Adelphi when it was a cinema. There's been a Herschel observatory fireplace tile that's been chosen. So a whole range of different items, including some photographs from the collection as well. I mean, Slough Museum collection covers a period of about 10,000 years, unbelievably. We've got a woolly mammoth tusk as the earliest item that we have in the collection, and we go right up to the present day and chart the history of the town. But as I say, artists came and chose an object that they wanted to use with the community to inspire the writing or the poetry or the music and so on. And then, as I say, have created with the community. Obviously, that's been hugely challenging. Had to be done virtually. In almost every case, actually, has been done over Zoom or some sort of like virtual means. But as I say, artists like Mike have persevered, have produced some fantastic artwork that I'm really proud to be able to share back with the Arts Council to really represent what we can do in Slough. So thank you ever so much for listening to me. Again, apologies apologies I can't be with you today, but hopefully in better times we will be able to get back together again at the museum and to be doing some more engagement work as part of the collection and making sure that it reaches out of the store and throughout the town. So thank you all, and very much thanks to Mike. He's been brilliant, and I'm really grateful.
What I'm going to talk about now is the Made in Slough bit that we did. So just let me get a slide up to show you what we had to do. Various artists were invited to put together a piece to contribute to 2020 Slough. And what we were asked to do was to go to the museum collection and pick something out. And because of my background as a writer, and I've done quite a lot of work on radio at Wycombe Sound, and so we recorded stuff there and broadcast it. I wanted to try and get that element into it. And what I felt was the radios seemed to be significant to me because they represent people from the past talking to people today. So that's what the radios to me represented. So I thought if we could collect reminiscences from the past, record them, make up podcasts, and also we published a booklet, that would be a good way to approach this. And also it gives the library something that they can put into their archive and keep for the future. So you will all be archived. When I got the radios, I had to use gloves to touch them, obviously, because one of them was made in 1934. But looking at them, when you look at the radios themselves, the big black one, the big brown one rather, was made in 1934, I believe. The little one was purchased in the co-op in Slough in the 1960s. But it's just striking that in that period they'd changed so much. And you've gone from a really complicated setup with the big brown one to a quite nifty setup where you've got, instead of the big knobs, you've got just this. And this was nice because if you look there, it talks down here, talks about Radio Luxembourg, which is a blast from the past. And the third program, all that kind of stuff. Berlin all spoke to me of the past and how the radios would represent that channel, if you like, backwards and forwards between us and them. And then the period, obviously, we wanted it within living memory. And so that's why we picked on the 60s and 70s. And the theme of work seemed appropriate because the links of Slough is very tightly linked to industry. And so that seemed an obvious topic. And the name for it, Made in Slough, that seemed an obvious title as well. So we set about it. Obviously, Anna's mentioned the impact of COVID on all of this. Obviously, we couldn't get together to do recordings and bits and pieces like that. So we recorded the people we could do, and those we couldn't record, we've got our actors in to do that. That was a group called Winging It. And so that's how we actually made up the recordings. And without the people who've made such a strong commitment to this project, it would have just fallen apart because it wasn't easy during lockdown to bring all the bits together. And people were very patient. We had to work out how to do it, and then we had to do it. So everything was done at least twice till we got it right. But I hope you'll go on to look at the podcast. I'll show you now a link to the podcast. On the right there, that's how they appear on the website. And you actually press the little box and you get the podcast or the introduction or something about Made in Slough. If you want to hear the podcast, you can pick them up at that website address, which is Michael Piercy Writer, all one word, .co.uk 2020. I'll leave that there for a moment if anybody wants to write it down. Okay, Jonathan, back to you because you've got a little link to do.
Yep, this is taken from podcast 2, Ethnic Barriers and Industrial Relations. Gilroy Coleman went to university in Manchester to study geography in the late 60s, but returned to Slough in the vacations, where he took a summer job that brought him face to face with ethnic barriers at work. Drew Spence will read Gilroy's contribution.
During Christmas, Easter, and summer vacations, I worked in a packing shed, filling tins and loading them onto pallets for distribution. Most of the workers in the packing shed at the time were foreign. The more skilled jobs of driving the filling machines were done by Germans, ex-prisoners of war who married locally and stayed on, and the less skilled by Poles. The Germans hated the Poles and vice versa. There were also French and Spanish workers, plus the odd Brit. The work was dull and repetitive, and I hated the shifts. 6 a.m. till 2 p.m., 2 p.m. till 10 p.m., or 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. Making up cardboard boxes alone at 4 in the morning in a cold shed was no fun. There was a canteen on site, which was open all day and also at 2 a.m. to feed the night shift. The man who operated the canteen at night was an Italian, who was often drunk, and his cigarette ash would sometimes fall into the fat fryer. Once he failed to turn up at all, and when we turned the lights on in the canteen, the whole place was covered in cockroaches. At that time, there were many people of color in Slough, from the West Indies, India, and Pakistan, but none working anywhere in the company that employed me. I did my undergraduate dissertation on various immigrant groups. It was focused on the geographic distribution of immigrants more than working conditions, but as part of the research, I interviewed the personnel officer at the company, and one of my questions was why there were no workers from the immigrant communities, the people that I was studying. His reply boiled down to the unions won't have it. I then interviewed the various union heads at the factory, and their replies could be summed up as the men won't have it. I'm not sure when it happened, but the no blacks policy fell away soon after, perhaps in the early 70s. I'm sure that this had nothing to do with me and was more to do with the decreasing acceptance of discriminatory policies in the UK at that time.
Thank you, Drew. And Gilroy is here somewhere. So thank you, Gilroy, for your submission, which I really enjoyed because it gave another aspect to a lot of the reminiscences of working in Slough, which, as you've heard, were personal and very nice in their own way. But there was a slightly darker side, and we can hear more about that in one of the other extracts that is coming up shortly. We've already heard from Jonathan today, who's our narrator on the podcast, and he's also doing all the narrating today. And obviously it sounds very professional because that's what he is. And he's freely given his time to this project. Well, we're lucky to get you because I know you've launched with others a breakfast show, Buck's Breakfast. Do you want to give us a little rundown on that?
Sure, yes. Well, just for everybody's benefit, how I know Mike is I was his producer at Wickham Sound, as he mentioned. But I've moved on from there and started, and I'm glad, Mike, you didn't call it a radio station, because it isn't. It's just a programme. It's a breakfast show for Buckinghamshire, hence Buck's Breakfast. But seeing as how Slough used to be in Buckinghamshire once upon a time, we'll allow you to listen. And you can listen wherever you are, because it's on the internet. We're not on an FM radio. You get us on your smart speaker, on your device, on your phone, on your computer at bucksbreakfast.co.uk. And we're only there between 7 and 10 in the morning, Monday to Friday. But what we do is a breakfast show for people like us. There are only two of us involved. We're both... I nearly said both in our 50s, but as of a couple of weeks ago, I'm not in my 50s anymore, so I can't say that. But we're people of a certain age, and we broadcast for people like us. So we don't play banging modern music. We don't talk really, really fast and really, really loud because we've got to get it all done in 30 seconds to get to the next commercial break. We take it nice and slow. We take it easy. We're calm. We call ourselves the antidote to shouty breakfast shows. So if you like modern music but not right up to the minute, anything from the last half century, if you like people thinking about what they're going to say before they say it, and doing interviews that are conversations rather than interrogations, then you might just like Buck's Breakfast. bucksbreakfast.co.uk. Do give it a try. Be interested to hear what you think.
Yeah, because also, Jonathan, you have... you do other things. You do commentate at events, don't you? Which is
Well, that's the day job when there was one. because obviously live events haven't happened in nearly a year. But what I do a lot of when I'm allowed to is the disembodied voice that booms out and announces things. I'll give you a demonstration. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Cardboard Box of the Year Awards. That sort of thing. It's known in the trade as the Voice of God, which is a great job title.
Okay, that's we know about Jonathan, and as I say, we're very grateful to get him to do our narration, because it just gives a kind of continuity to all of the podcasts, and it makes them sound much more professional than we could have managed on our own. I've already mentioned today the group of actors that stepped in to help make some of the recordings for the podcasts. They're called Winging It, and I know Piers Gledhill is here today. Piers is a major part of Winging It. He's got a cannon pointing at the top of his head. That's nothing to do with me.
No, that's just so that my wife keeps me in check.
Oh, right. So just tell us roughly what Winging It is.
Winging It is an improvisation group formed by former members of the West Wing Theatre, which used to be based at the West Wing Theatre that is now the Arbor Vale Football Club and I think it's called the Lee Academy? Or Lynch Hill Academy, that's it. So that site was demolished, and we didn't see each other for about 8 years. And then me and some others decided, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to reform and do what we love doing best in the absence of a theatre, and that is improvisation. So we sometimes, before COVID, we used to perform usually once a month at the poetry event at the Herschel Arms. And we would be the silly side of the poetry event.
So, I mean, describe what I've seen you, and I thought when I first saw you at the Herschel Arms, I thought it was fabulous because you describe what you do at one of your events.
Have you ever seen whose line is it anyway?
Yeah.
It's a little bit like that. So we obviously, the whole point of improvisation is that you don't rehearse what you're going to perform. That is always just out the top of your head. We practice our art, but we don't know what is going to happen on any particular night, because we do what we are told at the suggestion of the audience. So we'll let the audience choose a word or a situation or a scenario, and then they basically act it out. And then we sometimes let the audience say off, and then the next person comes in, or there's a rule-based to the game where if you make a mistake, you have to go off anyway, and then the next one of us comes on. Sometimes we invite pub members to join us, and since it's a poetry night, there's some amazingly talented people that join us, and then we're of course terribly jealous of how good they are.
I mean, in a sense, I was drawn to you. I asked if you would do this because I was hoping we could involve the improvisation technique in the podcast, but of course, when it came down to it, out of respect for the contributions, we couldn't improvise.
No,
we had to stick to a script. So I kind of put you in a straitjacket. But thank you for putting up with all that. And
no, we loved it, and thank you very much for inviting us on behalf of everybody. I don't quite know where Jeevan has got to, and it was just such a lovely insight into the past, and it strengthened our connection to Slough, and hearing these voices, it was lovely. Has been an absolute pleasure.
Okay, I'll hand over again to Jonathan to take us into the next part.
Many of the rights and privileges we take for granted in the modern workplace were hard-won. Teresa Clues remembers her father, who worked hard to represent his fellow workers as a trade union official.
My dad, Jimmy Ryan, worked at Slough Estates from the mid-60s as a fitter's mate for about 25 years. He also became a union steward of the Amalgamated Engineering Union. That's part of the Unite Union these days. The main thing that always sticks in my mind is his sense of fairness, his need to help others, in particular, health and safety at work for employees. There were also quite a lot of companies that were sweatshops and would take in migrant workers and only give a pittance of a wage. Some workers slept on the floors just to have a few hours sleep, then start a cruel day's work over again. I remember my dad and another union steward bringing everyone out to go on strike for better conditions and pay. I have a picture of him on the strike line. Back then, you could secondary picket, and so union members could support other members at companies that treated their staff poorly. One time, he threw a bag of flour on purpose to cause a scene so that it would get into the paper. And it worked. He drew attention to the problem, but he also got arrested. The strike where he was arrested was at a company who mainly employed migrant workers. When the workers went on strike, the company attempted to break the strike by bringing in South African students. My dad was in meetings with the employers on behalf of the workers. He told them they condoned what was going on by turning a blind eye to it all. It took a few strikes, but then the employers decided they would change things and make Slough a better place. Look at it today. It's got the best trading estate in the country. Well, that's my view anyway.
Thank you, Jane Heptonstall, for reading Teresa's submission about her father, which again is another one that took us to a different place. It's different from the sort of cozy world, perhaps, that people look at the 60s as being sometimes. I'm going to hand back to Jonathan again, who is going to link us into the next part.
The next extract is from podcast 3, A New Start at Slough Training Centre. Towards the end of the 60s, Richard Tyner was given a place at Slough Training Centre after moving to England from Ireland with his family. Richard is reading an extract from his own contribution.
Well, I remember it like it was only yesterday, except it wasn't. It was October 1967. My mother uprooted her 9 children, of which I was the eldest, and took us to Peterborough. We knew when we got there that in order for us to survive, the 3 eldest children would have to find work. I approached the DSS, and one of their officials arranged an appointment for me to come in to the office for a further chat. I don't know if he had a target or why, but it was a true act of kindness. At our meeting, he told me about a project from the government to give people a better chance of a career. The next I knew was receiving a travel voucher and directions to the government training centre at Slough. I was to attend classes 5 days a week and live in an old army billet in Sippenham. I well remember the acrid smell of cooking chocolate as we traipsed our way between the billets and the classrooms. If we stayed in Slough at the weekend, we would congregate in a pub, which I think was called the Pied Horse. It was full of mods, music and fun. The latter was not easy, as £3 a week did not go far. Having said that, I also recall seeing the Tamla Motown Roadshow at a Saturday matinee, Martha and the Vandellas and Stevie Wonder. And believe it or not, it was in the bingo hall. I thought my numbers had come up. This confidence I built in Slough at the training centre, it led me to find employment with Lloyd's TSB, Shell UK Oil, East Midland Allied Press, and a company called William Corey, an oil distribution company. After a number of years, I became an independent financial advisor. In those days, graduates were few and people who interviewed well got the job. I ended with a 30-year career in sales, so I feel ever grateful to that chap from the DHSS and to Slough. I look back on those 10 months in the 60s with great fondness, and curse my stupidity for not putting a value on keeping in touch with Jim, Gary, John Joe, and Al. Those guys looked after me like my DHSS benefactor. Memories are very happy ones, tinged with a modicum of sadness. We made our own fun. There were acts of generosity, guys who would take me to their homes at the weekend. They had nicknames as well. Tramp was the name for Alistair D.W. Barclay, and he took me to Bristol. And Bronco, of course, his name was Alan Lane. He took me to Oxford. These acts of kindness stay with me because they broaden both my horizon and appreciation of people in general. The sadness comes with the realization that I failed to maintain these friendships and of those warm-hearted, generous guys.
Thank you, Richard. I have here, just perhaps it might embarrass you a little bit, but I'm all for that. We've got the picture from the 60s. Here it comes. Now you're going to tell us which one you are.
I'm the one with the guy. I'm holding up the little fella that's on my shoulders.
Oh, right. Okay. I would have guessed you with a suit, but never mind. So, no, and they're quite a lively bunch. I mean, it must have been really good fun after you when you got back to the hut.
We were all on exactly the same wage, £3 a week. It was a shortage of beer that made us rebel and stand outside our billets.
Yeah. I noticed one other thing was you couldn't quite remember where the hut was, what they were like. The picture at the top there is a hut,
Yeah.
but it's not actually the same hut that you stayed in. I believe that was a bit more well developed than that. These were what was called Timber Town.
They look luxurious in comparison to our billets.
Oh, I think, yeah. I mean, what was it like in the winter in those huts?
Well, thank God I was only there. I trying to remember the 10 months that I was there. I had more problems with the dentist than I had with the weather. I can tell. Oh my God, you're right. You remind me. It was we had the snow come down, and it was my weekend to go home to Peterborough, and we set off at 4 o'clock from the billets on a Friday afternoon. By about 8 o'clock that night, we'd managed to get to Huntingdon, where the car ran off the road, and we walked 18 miles in the snow to get into my home. And I can remember my mother sitting me down, pulling what was left of my Ravel shoes.
I'll pull that picture up again, because what happened was when you sent that reminiscence in and you mentioned huts, and you said at the time you couldn't quite remember where they were. Well, we did get, if you look at the top left of this slide, mentions Jay Isherwood.
Yeah.
Jay got in touch and gave us some background on the where those huts might have been, and also she talked about the kind of people who were living in Slough at the time. So Jonathan's going to give us an intro to Jane's bit.
More information about the Slough Government Training Centre and where it was situated came from Jay Isherwood, SEGRO historian and researcher. She also spread light on the site of the barracks that Richard lived in. Jay's contribution is read by Jane Heptonstall.
The Government Training Centre was located on Slough Trading Estate at the eastern end of Buckingham Avenue. It was set up in the early 30s as Slough had a large intake of Welsh miners looking for new employment. I have an image showing that they built houses on the land as part of their training building skills, the houses being demolished, ready for the next intake. The accommodation mentioned is probably the Canadian Army Barracks, then on Twinches Lane. During the war, the training centre switched to training women to cover the skilled jobs left by men going to war. The Imperial War Museum has some amazing images of women being trained to build aircraft parts, service boats, and to operate large machinery. I'm not surprised that some of the women stayed on in the Canadian Army camp on Twinches Lane. Housing was really in short supply at that time due to bombing during the Blitz, particularly in the big cities. The camp was marked on a secret report showing the wartime vulnerabilities of Slough trading estate.
New country, new opportunities. New experiences are always challenging, sometimes frightening. This next memoir was sent by someone who wants to remain anonymous, so we're going to call him Darpan. When Darpan was in his early teens, he made the journey to England from Uganda with his brother. The two boys travelled alone to join their father in Slough. Darpan's contribution is read by V. Navius.
We had to travel with strangers, myself and my older brother. And it was really difficult. I think I was around 10 and a half. These days, I keep reflecting on this because my grandson is now about 10 and a half. And I keep looking at him and thinking, I would not let my two sons go and travel alone to a strange country. But times were hard for us then. When we lived in India, we lived in a village and we were studying at a very primitive village school. The education standard was like a village school for local people, and we lost out there. Then we went to Uganda, and during the 3 years, we had no schooling at all. When we came to the UK, we were put in a class based on our age. They asked me, "What do you know about trigonometry?" I just answered, "What is trigonometry?" They said, "What do you know about the right angle?" I knew nothing about it. And they asked about quadratic equations, and I hadn't even heard the phrase. We were bullied at school. Terrible, because in those days, there was only about 4 of us who were like of Indian origin. And one of them was a sort of biggish lad, and he was even bullied more than me. The other boys, English boys, who were local people, used to really beat him up. I used to try and stay away from all the problems and fights then, just to avoid being beaten up. I used to dread going to school because, you feel that you're likely to get beaten up by the bigger boys, and you're struggling to adjust, you're struggling to learn. And on top of that, it seems you're going there as a punishment. Never mind bloody learning anything, So by hook or by crook, you try to learn what you can, but more than anything else, you just want to make sure that you don't get beaten. That was the biggest problem. Bullying was accepted. Nowadays, there's a lot of awareness and everything else, and they will try and do something about it. But it's a situation no one's going to confess to. No one's going to say, "Look, I was bullied." I vividly remember the biggest bully, even his name. I could never forget, even after all these years. Nearly 50 years, more than that actually. He used to come to our shop in Sippenham, and I never kind of raised the past with him, He used to come into my shop and used to laugh and joke, and things like that. But that's all history now. In those days, there weren't many foreigners here. They just didn't like people with brown skin. They used to call them, well, really unpleasant names, Later on, after school was ended, I discovered I was actually extremely bright, as it turned out. When I went to work at ICI, this man called Richard Ainsworth, I'll never forget his name, he was a training officer there. And he said, "Would you like to learn the technician's course? Because you have no school qualifications." And after 1 year, I passed really well. Then he said, "Would you like to do O-levels?" I did those as well. And then I started doing A-levels. Altogether, I was in ICI for nearly 5 years. And during that time, I managed to pick up chemistry and physics. And I was on top of the class all the time, because once I started reading a subject, my comprehension was quite good. I ended up with 3 O-levels and 2 A-levels. My wife always supported the family business. But from the beginning, we were fighting poverty. And we were determined to get out of that poverty, just getting by day. Later in life, as a family, we were the main sponsor contributing towards the construction of a high school in a village in India, as the old building was a shed and not suitable as a place where children can learn. When I was a child in 1960 or 1962, I went to our village school in India. I refused to sit on a concrete floor, which I hated, and used to run away from school. In 2002, myself and my older brother visited the same school. Although 40 years had passed, it was still in the same situation, no desks and concrete floors. To help the children, we had 1,000 school study desks made specially, and with the approval of the education department, distributed to 16 village schools in the locality so that kids don't have to sit on the floor, where I refuse to sit.
The reader for that extract from Darpan's memoir was Vinay V.S. A few of the contributors were able to fill a whole podcast on their own, but the majority of contributors wanted to share shorter day-to-day memories of what working life was like, and this inevitably spilled into their home lives as well.
I worked in the wages office at McMichael on Wexham Road in the late 60s. I had to write out 400 clock cards with the name and number of each employee every week. The total wages for all employees in those days was less than £5,000 per week. I daydream about everyone giving me their wages for 1 week so I could buy a house. Well, I was engaged at the time, and you could buy a 3-bedroomed house for about £4,000. All the wages were paid in cash, but I wasn't worried about being robbed, too young for that to cross my mind. And anyway, it wasn't my money. The only security was the locked door. We didn't need to think about violent crime in those days. If it wasn't on the news or in the papers, we knew nothing about it. No social media then. I used to walk home at 11 p.m. after a night out at the Adelphi Disco in Slough Town Centre, back to Upton Lee. That's a 40-minute walk, but I felt quite safe. Later, when I was courting, my boyfriend had a scooter, so he picked me up. He was a mod with a parka with the fur around the hood. No crash helmet in those days. It was freezing on the back of that bike in the winter.
My father was chauffeur to Sir Michael Sobell, who owned McMichael. They had an electronics factory in Wexham Road, adjacent to the bridge and the railway line, and another factory in Buckingham Avenue.
I worked at McMichael's in the late 60s. I did the final test of the radiogram at the end of the production line. Fun days listening to pirate radio, great memories.
I worked there for a while in the 1960s. I had to sign the Official Secrets Act before I started. I was involved in making lots of components in very small batches, often 1 or 2 off. We never knew what they were for, but assumed it was mostly for MOD prototype and development work.
Interesting. It adds a little more to the conspiracy theories of the time. I do remember on one occasion, my mate said the boffins had blown some 400 kVA fuses and they demolished a wall in the process. They must have been playing a 78 at the time.
I used to love the smell of the machine shop there. It was kind of manly.
Thank you. The readers today have been Jonathan Pagden, obviously, and our narrator as well. Jane Heptonstall, Drew Spence, Vinay V.S. and Richard Tyner. We're going to close. Christine Isles, can you make yourself known? You can.
Hello, yes, I'm here with my husband, Kevin.
Hello. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Slough U3A and the links to the museum, because Anna mentioned that in her video. So what kind of things have you done to promote the museum?
Well, I suppose the Slough U3A local history group, basically in normal times, would be meeting once a month, normally at St Lawrence's Church, where we'd have a guest speaker, or we would be out and about visiting buildings, having tours. I think the last one we did, we were given a personal tour of Langley Hall School, which was wonderful. And then after that, it was the lockdown. We have at times, as part of our events at St Lawrence's Church had people come in from Slough Museum bringing in a number of artefacts that we were able to look at, handle, and the person who came in would tell us all about these items. So that was the initial link. St Lawrence's Church itself has a really good display about Slough's history, some of the items from the museum, I believe. And so when we meet at the church, we are really absorbed in the history of Slough. And there became the opportunity that through Anna, there was the opportunity for some of us, if we wanted to go and help to sort some of the resources in Slough Museum. Well, when I say Slough Museum, the items all being stored in a unit on the trading estate. So around this time last year, on a Tuesday afternoon, or no, Tuesday during the day actually, a number of us would go along and we would look through the boxes, we would check what was in there, and we would put a list on top of the box to say what was inside it. Otherwise, you just open the box, you wouldn't have a clue what was inside. And so we just helped really with doing some of the cataloguing. And I think that there's several people here on the screen today who were with me. And sometimes this time last year, it was bitterly, bitterly cold. But hopefully we were doing a useful job. We enjoyed it. We often got distracted because we'd get involved in what was in our box. So, oh, look at this programme from 1952 or this ticket. And we'd just be looking and sharing and learning so much. And then, of course, it all came to an end with the lockdown. But hopefully after lockdown, we'll be able to restart the research again.
Yeah, that's good. What is outside of the work with the museum, what do the U3A get up to?
Well, it's basically an organisation for older, retired or semi-retired people. I think the group in Slough has been going for about 5 years, although the organisation's been much longer than that as a national organisation. Basically, people join the U3A. Our branch actually charges £18 a year. And then all the members, and Slough U3A has about 150 members, what happens then is that we have a monthly meeting when anyone can go to it, usually at St Andrew's Church at the Grove, where we have a guest speaker, and a cup of tea and a chat and a social. But then there are all sorts of other interest groups that people can join up to. So for myself, although I've been running the local history group for the last 2 years or so, I also belong to the walking group, the art appreciation group. My mind's gone blank. I'm sure there's another group I'm involved in with the U3A. But off the top of my head, there are people who are involved in bridge. In bridge, there are 2 drawing and art classes. There are language classes. I think there's wine appreciation. There is cooking. There's a huge amount of things. So now someone's putting up on the chat the website for the Slough U3A. This is from Anita, who is the wife of our chair. So if you look at that one, which she put up on the chat, that tells you more. But obviously we'd welcome any new members. I've been retired for 4 years now and joined the U3A soon after that. And I've made a huge number of friends and contacts that I didn't have before. It's a great organisation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to thank everyone for coming. We've clocked 42 visitors, which I'm very pleased with, largely through the help from the Slough U3A. And I think apart from my stumbling, fortunately, I will be able to edit the video so it won't look quite as bad as it felt this end. But then I'm not a performer, which is why I was quite keen to get other people in to do the readings and to make the recordings, because I think to actually read your words in front of people is actually quite hard. I just want to give a little reminder about how you can listen to the podcasts. Go to Michael Piercy Writer, that's all one word, .co.uk/202020. What you heard today were extracts, so there's lots more to enjoy in the complete podcasts. And don't forget the book that contains all the submissions that we used and background to the project. The online version of the book is available free of charge via the same website. Thank you all for being so attentive during the past hour, and I hope you've enjoyed and been intrigued by these personal memoirs of working in Slough in the 1960s and 70s.